Welcome to the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast, brought to you by Donorsearch, the show that takes you inside the lives of thought leaders in fundraising and philanthropy. I'm your host, Jay Frost. In today's episode, Tim Burcham tells how his early training in music and theater was the perfect background for a stunning career in higher education fundraising and beyond. Handpicked by his university's president, he rose from recruitment officer to leader of a new 16-institution, $900 million fundraising effort, and then served as chair of the international board of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. He tells us about his journey and his work today to help attract and mentor a rising new generation of fundraising leaders. Tell me about yourself.
Okay. But in terms of my professional career?
However you'd like to start. Yeah. Please.
Well, I have kind of an interesting pathway to where I am today. I actually went to school for theater and music.
Really?
Yes.
Whereabouts?
At Marshall University, Huntington, West Virginia.
Uh-huh.
I'm from that general area. And so I thought I was going to Broadway. That was my plan. And when I graduated from Marshall, I was approached by the president of the university because I had been very involved in a lot of productions and sang at Christmas at his home, all these things.
Oh, wow.
And so as I'm coming up for graduation, I was approached by the president to become the first full-time on-the-road admissions recruiter for Marshall University. This was back in the 70s.
Wow.
And so I decided to take that job because I needed a job.
Sure.
Till I could get to my ultimate goal, which was Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
And I never got to Broadway.
Is that because you just were having too much fun performing this role that you were in?
I ended up staying in that job for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And then the boss that I had at the time said to me, you're really good at this work, and if you're going to stay in this work, you really need an advanced degree. And he happened to know the person that was in charge of admissions and recruiting at the University of Kentucky in Lexington.
Mm-hmm.
So he introduced me to him, and that gentleman offered me a job at UK part-time while I was attending graduate school. And that's how I got to Lexington. And from there, I ended up graduating with my master's in higher ed administration, which was a complete departure from my other training. And I became the director of freshman admissions at UK. And I did that for 8 years. And I tell the story that my theater and music background were absolutely perfect training for that work. And it's also turned out to be perfect training for my fundraising work. So in the span of those 8 years that I was at UK in admissions, we went from a open admission institution to a selective admission institution.
Yeah.
And I was approached to create a merit scholarship program to help recruit the top students. And so I interfaced with the development office to create this scholarship program and helped raise $1.5 million for the first endowed scholarship, merit scholarship. And that's how I got introduced to development. And so they offered me a position in the development office, working for the University Medical Center. And so I took that job.
Sure.
And ever since I've been in fundraising.
Right. Way leads on to way.
Yeah, it was just one layer after another.
But before we go any further, I still want to know, what was your audition song when you were back in school? Because if you wanted to go to Broadway, you had a song or a piece.
I don't even really remember what it would have been. Probably Probably something from Music Man.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because I did that show multiple times.
Really?
Yeah.
As which character?
Multiple characters.
Really?
Yeah. I did summer stock theater and university theater.
Wow. He's a what? He's a what? He's a Music Man.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. So I don't even remember what song it would have been, but yeah. So it's that background lended itself very well to public speaking and kind of being good on your feet and all that, which, in the recruiting business was basically everything. That's all I did was go and talk to people and make presentations and invite people to campus and tours and all that sort of thing.
But being kind of handpicked by the president to do that,
right.
That was, it's exceptional identification on the part of the president, and really remarkable that they reached out to a student like that, isn't it? Yeah. But then also it must have been... I
knew him really well as a student because I was in his home all the time performing. Every major president's event, they had the music department
come out and
perform. And so I was in his home all the time.
Yeah.
And all the major university events. And of course, he came to all the shows. And so I knew him and he knew me.
Did you continue that friendship, that relationship? Over time?
He ultimately retired before I left Marshall. He retired.
Oh, okay. He
was at the end of his career at that point. But he was very kind to me, very, very gracious to me. And so he kind of started me on this path that I was not intending to be on. And so I went into the development world, really in an academic medical center setting, cancer center, children's hospital, all the academic colleges, medicine, dentistry, nursing, pharmacy, all that. Did all the annual giving programs for all of those entities and small major gift fundraising, which was really how I cut my teeth in the fundraising world. And then, oddly enough, 8 years into that, 4 years into that, I got approached by the university president at UK to start a development program for the 2-year college system of Kentucky, which was part of the university system.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I took that position and literally started with nothing. There was no development program, and there were 14 institutions across the state that comprised that system.
So how did you decide? Because that was a lot to bite off.
It was a lot to bite off. The reason they approached me was I was the only person on the central development staff who had been on all of those campuses from my days when I was recruiting students.
Oh, wow.
Sure. So I was really the only development team member that they felt would understand any of that system or those institutions. And so I literally they gave me an office and I started with nothing. So that was an incredible experience.
Was that exciting or terrifying or?
A little bit of both. I really didn't know what I was doing, to be honest. I just knew that there was a lot of potential because these were out in the communities all over the state, and they had this tremendous network of individuals and companies that relied on these colleges locally for their workforce.
But it sounds like they were also probably not being tended.
No,
and
no
so
one,
this
no one was
time.
really, from the main university in Lexington, no one was out helping them raise money.
That's a big lift to get, to welcome people back into the fold who care already, but they've never really been involved or not invited to participate.
Yeah. Well, what I found, which was very interesting, is those colleges had been receiving support all of their lives, as institutions. The university had not fully recognized that support. When I got out there and started finding that support existed, then all I really had to do was figure out how to maximize all that activity and formalize it, build a program around it. And so I did that. And interestingly enough, I had been trained in the typical alumni giving model, where you work with alumni and you acquire the donor and then you renew the donor and upgrade over time and all that sort of thing. That model does not work in the community college world. They don't have the same alumni affinity to those institutions that four-year institutions have.
I hear this a lot, but one thing that would be really helpful for me to hear and for others to hear is why they don't have the affinity, because I think there are a lot of assumptions about that.
So, a lot of it is because they're two-year institutions.
Sure.
And for those institutions, they were feeder schools up to the main university.
Okay, so it's sort of like the high school college dynamic, or
it's their
college graduate school.
There's no housing, so they're not like housed on a campus.
Right.
There are no fraternities and sorority, none of that stuff.
All those things that are kind of identity related.
All those connection and identity pieces of the university don't typically exist. They didn't in Kentucky at those institutions. So they were basically community-based, off-site programs of the university to get transfer students to come to the main campus. So when I got them, but the other side of those institutions is there were all these other programs that were dedicated to training the workforce for those local communities in nursing and allied health professions, and a lot of technical programs, and in engineering and all kinds of things. And so what I found is these communities loved these colleges, but the connection was not an alumni-driven connection. It was an economic development, community development role that these institutions played in those communities. And what I found is a tremendous amount of money had been given by the local community businesses and non-alumni individuals who were using the resources of the college to create a workforce for their businesses. So it's a really different model, and I had to kind of pivot in terms of my understanding of what fundraising was. And I made the dramatic decision to really start once I had to hire people on all 14 of those campuses and create a development office in each location. Once I got that team assembled, I decided to take us into a campaign, a major gifts campaign. So I flipped the model on its head. Instead of starting with small gifts and going up, I started with big gifts and went down.
Yeah.
And it worked beautifully.
But were those institutional big gifts, or were they individual big gifts?
They were both individual and corporate.
So owners of companies, I guess, things like that, who had that
business
affinity.
People and companies. Corporate philanthropy.
You describe that as love, which is interesting because I don't, oftentimes when people think about companies and foundations, that love isn't the word that comes to mind necessarily. It's the it's the benefit that they derive. It's the brand affinity. It's things like that. But you're describing something richer.
Yeah, companies that surrounded these colleges relied so much on those colleges for their workforce. And the college kind of created a culture of higher education in those communities that brought the whole community up. And so those companies were benefiting from that culture of education and career advancement and all that sort of thing. So they really did love these institutions, and they were very generous to them. And because they were locally based, they could turn on a dime and create a program, to serve the needs of a company in some specific technical workforce training initiative. So all of that happened. I was able to figure out how to build a program with a different model than I had been trained in at the university. And it worked beautifully. And then in 1998, the governor of the state of Kentucky decided to separate those community colleges away from the University of Kentucky and create them into their own system. And once again, the governor's office approached me to go to the new system with those colleges because I had done the campaign, I had built an endowment, and all that money was going to the new system, and they wanted me to go with it.
This is, I mean, all of this is fascinating, but I'm wondering where Tim was in this, if you know what I mean, because it sounds like people were saying, you can do this, and you said, sure. And then there's an opportunity, you said, okay, which is really exciting, but then you were doing it kind of as a soloist, building great things. But how was this, how did you feel about all this? What was happening to you?
It's a really tough question. I guess I saw the opportunity and realized that I actually could do it. I can do this, and I was being invited. I've never applied for a job. I've never filled out a job application in my life.
Right.
Never. People have invited me to come and do something. And I've always felt like I could do it. Mm-hmm. And obviously they felt like I could do it, which is why the invitation was extended. So I actually moved out of the university setting and into the community college system setting to create that new system from the ground up. Yeah. And built a whole new institution of higher education around now this new system of colleges that were independent from the university. I founded a foundation, created the foundation for the new system, and led that for 18 years. And then over the course of those years, my portfolio just exploded. I went in as a development professional, but as a new system, we didn't have a lot of the components of a new system. So I ended up being responsible for marketing and public relations because it was so closely tied to the development program. I ended up being responsible for strategic planning because we needed a plan, and I was screaming for one to support the fundraising activities that we needed to mount, and there was really no solid strategic plan for this new system. It was just created by the legislature, and then we were thrown into it. Sure. And so I ended up getting strategic planning in my portfolio. We were going through this massive change, throwing employees together. They merged us with another system. It was very traumatic for the employees. And so we were going through all this change. And so I ended up, because of my strategic planning role, having to learn how to manage all of these 10,000 employees of the system, how to manage them through the changes that we were going to take them through to create this new system. So I ended up with a change in project management office and went away and got certified in change management so I could lead that effort on behalf of the system. I got tagged in government relations because I was raising money for these new entities, and I needed state support to round out the funding mechanism. And there was no one
doing that.
There was no one doing that. So I was sent to the legislature to do that. So I ended up creating a government relations division. And then I opened up an office in Washington, D.C. So it just would.
How many? So you started with one, but then how many people in the end were?
I had 17 offices.
Okay.
Across 16 across the state and one central headquarters where I was located. I had 27 people in my shop centrally, and then about 60 people across the state.
Sure.
Spread out among all these different institutions. So my career just kind of mushroomed.
It sounds very organic, but you were bringing a strategic lens to all of those activities, clearly.
As those things unfolded, they became more strategic and more aligned. We aligned everything together. And I had a very visionary president that I worked for.
I was going to ask you about that because it sounds like they just let you do what you did best.
He just gave me free rein.
Okay.
Because I was working in areas where he did not have expertise. And that's the reason that the governor's office approached me originally was because I had the marketing background. Sure. I had the fundraising background. And so they wanted me to be part of the executive team that was creating this new system. And the president that they installed recognized that he didn't have the skill sets that I did. So he just set me loose and supported me tremendously.
Were you coming up with the goals too?
Everything.
So, which is great. I mean, it's completely autonomous. It sounds like you were running your own business.
I was, it felt very entrepreneurial because I was, we were literally creating the system at the same time that we were running the system. It was like we got thrown in to this creation of a new institution. And we had to create it while we were running it. How was this for the students? I'm curious, during this whole time. Were they more engaged than as students? Because a lot of things are happening now, bringing attention to the campus, which is good. The students were elated. Okay. Because now we had a lot of freedom those institutions had a lot more freedom because they were not tied to the main university campus anymore. They were each independently accredited as separate institutions under an umbrella system. So they could finally grow their own identity, provide unique services. And they did. Right. We did it all under a common branded banner, of course, of the system. But each institution, and I built out a marketing and PR function at each college, a development function, government affairs stayed at my level because it was state and federal. And the college presidents work with local politicians in their region. But I was able to build out a team at each one of those main college campuses. And then we created a very team-oriented culture. So all of these people were on my team. So I had this huge team of people in each one of those disciplines: development, marketing, planning. This lasted until when? When did you? I retired 40 years to the day on the same day that I started my career at Marshall. Yeah. 40 years later, on that same day, I retired in 2016. You already, just the way you did this, it sounds, I mean, not just masterful, but it also sounds like it was fun. I'm sure there was a lot of stress in there, but. I look back on it and wonder how in the world I did that. Well, that's why I was asking where Tim was in the middle of all that, because, you were the guy. When you're in the midst of it, you just do it, and I just kept bearing down and just pushing forward and just kept creating and creating and creating. And then when I got toward the end, 18 years into that, I had kind of coasted into status quo because everything was kind of a well-oiled machine 18 years later from that day that we started. And I just woke up one day and I was like, I've done everything I can do for this system. Right. I'm done. And I literally just retired very quickly. I just said to the president, because he was getting ready to retire, and I was like, Mike, I'm not staying. When you go, I'm going. Right. And we did. We both left relatively the same time. When was that? 2016. Part of the reason I'm asking that is because, and this is a fascinating story on so many levels. I have two questions here. One is about that transition, that the ability to make sure that everything you had built with your team was maintained and then could grow afterwards. Right. That's been an issue for many people in our field, where those who stay with something for a long time have trouble letting go. Right. And then the other part is what it must feel like now, because you're looking there, and I'm sure that they've had their share of challenges in the last 16 plus months. Yeah. Higher education has lost $183 billion during COVID. Right. So first of all, talk about that, your ability to let go, because that's a good lesson for people. And then how it is that for a person who built that to watch what you built also go through this difficulty. Teeter a little bit. I had a very strong sense of not wanting to be that guy that stays too long. Right. past their prime, and then be remembered as the cranky old man. You know what I'm saying? I just was not going there. I had accomplished a lot. I was at the peak. Everything was at the peak of achievement. And I was like, this is the time to go, because I'm not, once the new president process kicked in, I was like, I'm not certain where this is going to go. And I'm going to leave on a high note, and I'm going to leave on my terms, and be happy about my departure instead of leaving under other circumstances that might not have been of my own choosing. So, plus I wanted to do something different. At that point, I was just ready to do something different and more kind of, in a different vein. So, I just decided I was not going to be that guy, that stuck around. The members of the president's cabinet were starting to retire around me, and I was like, this is not where I need to be anymore. I've done what I can do. I've done a lot, and I'm happy with what I've achieved. It's time for me to go, and I'll choose another path. And that's what I did. And a week after I retired, I started my firm. Literally 1 week to the day I started my consulting practice.
And what kind of work are you doing? I don't really know the scope.
Well, it's morphed. When I first began, it was really around fundraising, advocacy, and public affairs, and planning. What I've ended up doing, my very first contract was an executive search contract. And so,
but I can see that. I mean, you were the product of that in a way.
So I got into executive search. Right. I wasn't searching for that. I didn't define it. I didn't define it as a part of my company portfolio. Mm-hmm. But I was referred to someone. And it was a national fraternity based at Miami University in Ohio. And so I had done massive number of searches. I was involved in it. With 16 collegiate institutions, we had 16 CEOs, and I was involved in all of those search processes.
Right, plus all your staff and
plus
everything
all
else.
The other stuff. So it was not a difficult thing for me to know what to do, and so I did it.
But did they come to you looking for another Tim Burcham?
Not really.
Sometimes that happens, and people get a sense of the brand.
Really.
Okay, good. They were looking for your knowledge about what would constitute successful leadership.
And God bless Lori Gusdorf at AFP. She's the one that referred me because of my 30 years of leadership at AFP. She knew I had transitioned into this consulting role. And she had worked really closely with me all these years at AFP. So somebody called the international headquarters in DC looking for a search consultant. And it was close. She knew that Lexington was close to Miami in Ohio, right outside of Cincinnati. So she referred him to me. And that's how I got that original contract.
So it started doing executive search just because, well, why not?
Why not?
But that now you're doing.
I still do executive search. Got 2 searches underway at the moment. But what I have done is I've taken all of that strategic planning background and the development background and the change in project management background and melded it into a methodology that only I use. Planning, for instance. A lot of organizations have plans. They don't have outcomes. They don't have specific outcomes that they can measure and track over time, that are on a calendar, that have benchmarks, that have risks and contingencies built in.
Sure.
They don't know how to move an organization from where they are today to where they want to be, say, 5 years from now, because they cannot get the people in the organization to change what they're doing to take them down a new road. So overlaying change management into those planning processes and assessing what level of change it's going to require those employees, particularly to go through individually, is a secret to my process that a lot of people don't factor in. So I've built out a pretty strong strategic planning portfolio. And then I bring in behind that, a comprehensive fundraising program.
Sure.
How to develop a program from the ground up, which I've done multiple times. But it's driven by that underlying planning process.
Right.
And it's worked out beautifully for me.
Now, you mentioned AFP.
Yes.
And so talk about your involvement with AFP. Why, maybe most importantly, why AFP, why that world is important to you?
Well, when I first began, the old NSFRE.
Oh, yeah.
We were creating a chapter of NSFRE was being created in Lexington the very same year that I started fundraising at UK. And so I went to the very first meeting of that chapter. And I knew it was a place where I could learn and get to know other fundraising professionals from the local community. And it turned out to be a fantastic network for me. And so I just kept staying involved, and became the chapter president at one point. And back then, way back, every chapter president of a chapter was a member of the board. So I ended up going to the board meetings of the old NSFRE.
That was Pat, I guess, who was the president at the time.
Yeah. Pat Lewis.
Yeah.
And so I kind of got my taste of the kind of the corporate AFP world of all these chapter leaders. And then I got tagged to chair a committee. The awards committee was my first assignment at that level.
Sure.
And then I just maintained my involvement over time, became a awards committee. Then I moved over to government relations because of my lobbying background, chaired the government relations committee. Then I formed the PAC, the Political Action Committee, which was one of the most difficult things I've done in my career.
Really? Why?
Because of so much opposition to the concept of having a political action committee for AFP.
What was the nature of that?
A concern that it was inappropriate for a nonprofit like AFP, representing nonprofit charitable organizations, to be involved in politics. But it took me 2.5 years to educate people on what a PAC is, what it does, and how AFP would benefit from that.
Were you drawing from your experience with the system?
Yeah. Right. All of my years of working at the state and federal level in legislation and regulatory stuff, I knew that AFP really needed that kind of an entity. And it took me 2.5 years to get it done.
PACs still aren't popular today. I don't mean AFP's PAC, although I don't know how much support it has. I mean,
today it's a tremendously well-supported entity of AFP. But I went from there to chairing the external relations division of AFP. And then I was tagged to become secretary of the board. And then I was elected chair-elect of AFP and served as the international chairman in 2007 and 2008.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's tenure after your chairmanship. You transition into different roles at AFP after you serve as chair. And then I was invited to join the AFP Foundation. So I've been a part of that now for the past 5 years. And I chair the External Major Gifts Committee of the AFP Foundation. So 38, almost 40 years of involvement through all those various pieces and parts of AFP, and I'm still there.
Yeah,
and not going anywhere.
I was going to say that takes a tremendous amount of time and commitment, and it's really important. I mean, all of us in the field, I know, appreciate that work, even if we weren't aware of it, that you were doing it all. We really do appreciate it. Yeah. But I imagine that there, just as with the system that you built from the ground up, that you see opportunities for change.
Oh yeah.
And AFP and all the associations have gone through massive change. One of those elements, of course, is responding not just to what we've lived through together for the last year and a half, but also some of the changing dynamics of the economy as a whole. Mm-hmm. And they affected membership and services for all the major associations.
Right.
So I know you're not going to give us an inside view of what's the scuttlebutt inside AFP today, but I'm curious about your view about these entities and what they could look like if you and others, reached out to us to help make them everything they could be.
Yeah. Well, the main thing that I've been working on the foundation side is really to get AFP to focus its attention on replacing leadership in the sector.
Okay.
And preparing the next generation of leaders in the fundraising world, because we're about to lose a significant number of our senior leaders just because of aging out. The baby boomers are aging out.
You can see that as we walk the halls even here. But what do you imagine those leaders might look like? I mean, literally and figuratively.
Much more diverse.
Okay.
So the overlay of diversity, equity and inclusion, that overlay around identifying rising leaders. And AFP is now in the midst of creating a formal 3-tiered leadership development program. And I'm charged as one of the committee chairs to find resources to support that. And it's really one of the first things that we've done that, in my estimation, will be very attractive to external funding sources outside of AFP. Because if you think about losing leadership at nonprofit organizations, particularly in senior development roles in local communities across the country, if we don't do something to help feed that pipeline and provide a pathway for those people to get into leadership positions, then communities all over the country are going to suffer for that. And the nonprofit world will suffer for it.
What does that suffering look like? Paint us a picture of the difference between making that change and not making it at the local level.
Well, not being able to find qualified professionals. Right. If
so, no revenue for those local social service agencies, arts organizations, all these other things. If community hospitals.
I mean, it's hard enough now to find qualified fundraising professionals. It's a pretty difficult assignment. And in the search business, I can tell you for a fact, it's difficult to find people with really solid experience, and credentials and background to step into really significant leadership roles in nonprofit organizations. With the loss of the top tier kind of senior leaders moving out, aging out, where's the pipeline behind them?
Well, why aren't they there? Is it because older folks have failed to bring them in? Is it because
have not really done a good job with succession planning?
Okay.
Of thinking long-term down the road. And there have not been very clear pathways for fundraising staff to find their way into leadership roles.
Right. So the issue isn't just national. It's obviously very local, organizational.
Very local. And we haven't fully, I don't believe, we have not fully maximized our chapter network around leadership development. Mm. And so this new leadership development program that's currently in development itself is really going to try to address that need across the country. Obviously using chapters as key partners in that whole paradigm and mix. And finding external funding sources who will help us build that out and resource it and sustain it over time so that it can really address these pipeline issues.
It's so interesting on that. I know this is a very tactical kind of question, but you managed to find the resources in your work within the institutional environment and then within AFP to fund those kinds of changes. But we know that in many organizations, even managing to make an argument for a new staff member, for a little more resource for software, for a screening, I mean, whatever the thing is, that's challenging. So how much of this is getting people to rethink not just how they sell these things, but the importance of them, the commitment to them? I mean,
well, it's bigger than AFP.
Right.
And I, as we articulate what we're talking about here, this is really not even about AFP. We're simply an organization that is a natural conduit to solve this issue.
Right.
And we play a unique role from our perspective as fundraising professionals to solve that role within the sector.
Right.
And so it really is a bigger issue than just an AFP program. And when you pivot your focus away from the organization and outward into the community, it changes the conversation completely. This is not about building AFP. This is about AFP helping communities through our network solve these issues.
Do you think that itself has been a change for AFP and the other associations?
It's a huge change.
Okay.
Because, as a membership organization, it's all about, serving the members,
right,
which we do and need to do. But as an association of professionals, when you turn the focus away from serving us to us serving the sector and the communities, it changes the conversation.
Right.
And that's the open door for conversation with funders. Because now they're not giving the money to AFP to help AFP. They're giving us the money to help the communities where we live and work across the nation.
And based on what the communities identify as their own needs and interests.
Right.
Right.
But a leadership development framework that we're putting into place that can be applied in every location based on what the circumstances are there. It's a very different kind of paradigm. And it's one that I'm really super excited about.
Right, which is why you keep doing it.
Which is why I'm still around.
Yeah, because it's funny. It seems like in both of these big stories that you've been sharing, it was preparing an organization to be on its own. It's like giving birth to the baby.
Right.
That 18-year window before retirement, for example, is that there you go. Okay, so time to go away, off to college. And it must be feeling the same way with AFP, although I know you have still lots to do. But you've done a ton.
Yeah.
What is left undone? I don't mean specifically just within the business, but what's on your agenda? I mean, what are you looking forward to doing in the next decade or so?
It's at this stage in my career, it is really about paying it forward, and really transitioning this to the next generation that's coming up, and doing what I can to help them. If there's anything that I can do from my experience and the path that I took that can help someone who's kind of on a similar path or is trying to get to a certain point in their career, to me, that's where I should be spending time, and I do a lot of that, work with younger fundraising professionals who are really grappling with career and career choices and which path they're going to go and what kind of work they're going to really want to do. So I see that as kind of the final part of my legacy is helping that generation come up behind us, because again, we're all leaving. Those of us in these senior roles are leaving, and I want to make sure that there's a pipeline behind us that can take our places and just keep everything moving on upward. And if we don't spend time thinking about that and addressing it, we'll look back and there won't be anybody there.
Right. Well, I hope it doesn't mean you're going to lure everybody out of a musical theater program into fundraising, because I think we need the stages too. No. But so there's no audition for you for, I don't know, Man of La Mancha or something in the future?
Those days are gone.
Well, that's a little disappointing, but I'm glad to hear that you're going to still be bringing all this energy and insight for a long time to come for our world. And I really appreciate your taking some time to share some of this.
Sure. My pleasure.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks for the opportunity.
My pleasure. The Philanthropy Masterminds podcast is underwritten by Donorsearch, the world leader in donor intelligence solutions. Our producer is Jack Frost. Our theme music is Be My Remedy, composed and performed by House of Say. You can subscribe to the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find blogs, webcasts, and see free accredited webinars with our featured masterminds at donorsearch.net, or check the show notes and descriptions.